Welcome to Pop Culture and the Perception of Justice, a conversation with screenwriters David E. Kelley and Jonathan Shapiro. My name is Kelly-Ann Clarke, and I have the distinct fangirl honor of introducing our wonderful panel. I'll start with Mr. Kelley. He is obviously the legal producer of my time. I don't know about yours, but he is the legal producer of my time. He went and graduated with a law degree from Boston University. When he was an associate, wrote a screenplay and caught the eye of some folks in LA and ended up being a writer and producer for the classic and just epitome of legal shows, LA Law. He forayed that career into my law school life, known as Ally McBeal in the Practice, and Boston Legal, and then continued on to what we're here to talk about today. Not only Goliath, a show about a down-and-out lawyer looking for redemption, but also, obviously, a lot of other things that I don't even need to tell you who he is. I'm such a fangirl. Let me say this. When I was about in 6th grade, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I saw LA Law, and it was cemented everything that I thought about law, and so I have to thank you for that. And when I was in law school,
I didn't know if blame was coming.
Blame. Well, it was going to happen anyway, but then I knew I was going to be a litigator. I was going to go in the courtroom. I didn't wear my burgundy suit today, but Susan Day in that burgundy suit changed my life. During law school, the dancing baby, I like a fresh bowl. If that wasn't my law school career, every Sunday night, right after mock trial practice, we watched the practice. And we corrected some of the objections. And Boston Legal, I am such a fangirl. And they didn't know that because I didn't tell them. Boston Legal, my first legal job, my named partner thought that Denny Crane was inspired by him. And it very well could have been. So that's my whole life. Okay, back to the introductions. Jonathan Shapiro graduated from Harvard University and then got his law degree from UC Berkeley. He is an amazing lawyer, and he has done all kinds of things, spent 10 years as a federal prosecutor. He's an outstanding lawyer who has somehow parlayed his legal career into a television writing and producing career. Along with Mr. Kelley, he is co-producing and writing the show Goliath, which will stream on Amazon Prime. So you better go watch it. Our moderator is Renee Montagne, who is the host of the morning edition on NPR. So listen, you'll know her voice. She graduated also from UC Berkeley and served as a fellow at the University of Southern California. I am so excited and proud to welcome you to this presentation. Thank you.
Bravo, Kelly-Ann. Nice. That might be the best introduction I've ever been part of. Thank you all for being here, and this is going to be both about them talking. I hope, and I don't have any doubts that will be no problem, having spoken to Jonathan on the phone already at great length, and but also there'll be a question and answer at the end. And so, get your thoughts, get your ideas and your questions ready. This isn't exactly bifurcated, but there's sort of two things going on here. One is that there's the creative. It's what they do, screenwriters, producers, but also the real. And both of these lovely people have been in the real world of the law and the justice system. So I think I'd like to start with the creative, or at least, I guess if you can break it up that way, with Goliath, because this is your latest project and, kind of happening now to the point where I'm not dead sure you can tell us all that much about it. But the basics, please, starting, either you guys pick. David?
Well, it's a new show for Amazon. We had hoped to provide you with a brief clip to give you the sense of what the animal is about, but that clip did not arrive. I suspect lawyers were heavily involved in that decision. For now, we're just going to blame Amazon. But I guess the thumbnail sketch of the show would really be about a down-and-out, broken, disenfranchised lawyer very, very damaged, trying to find redemption in himself, in his career, in his world. And the means of that redemption comes in the form of a lawsuit. Different from the projects that I've worked on before and worked on with Jonathan is it's a single case through 8 episodes. I've spent the bulk of my career telling law stories in sprint form, where an event happens at 10 minutes past the hour and 5 minutes before the hour, someone's giving a closing argument. So when Renee talks about my connection to the real world, she's being generous, because I've been operating and functioning in the make-believe world and perhaps idealized world of law. This one, it will still be romanticized to a certain extent. We will still take poetic and legal license where permitted, but we really do get more into the weeds of the anatomy of a lawsuit. Jonathan, you want to add to that, or?
Well, what we were never able to do on The Practice or Boston Legal was to take the time to tell a lot of what I think we both found to be the most interesting stories, which are the personal ones. What it costs the lawyers to do these cases, emotionally, personally, professionally. What it costs the witnesses and the parties. So Amazon Prime has given us the opportunity to go deeper in the stories. The other thing that we were interested in is, I love that introduction, thank you. I personally could have heard it go on forever. It was fantastic. David's right about the clip, but I was going to pretend that we were doing this because Renee Montagne is who I listen to every morning on the radio, and that we were doing a radio show, so you didn't need to see a clip, but that is not going to work.
Only confuse things.
But
Visuals.
I've been writing TV for about 15 years, and Kirkland and Ellis offered me an of-counsel position to handle litigation 4 years ago. And so for 2 years, while I was writing on the Blacklist, I was doing litigation at Kirkland and Ellis. Now, I hadn't been in a law firm for about 15 years.
And I couldn't let it continue.
Very sweet. But we had a conversation, and I said, law has changed so much since we wrote Boston Legal, and it's changed so much since I started. And the show Goliath is about 2 of the biggest changes that I noticed in the law after a 15-year hiatus. The first was that there are anywhere from 20 to 27 law firms in the United States that had revenue over $1 billion. That's Goliath. The David in our law system now, according to the American Bar Association, is made up of people, 28% of whom screen, according to the survey, as problem drinkers. 20% of them reporting depression. Those are the Davids. And so we thought that a show that showed the sort of the haves and the have-nots was important. I guess the last element of why we wanted to do Goliath is that when I was in high school, we read de Tocqueville and his letters on America. And de Tocqueville said that the most important democratic institution in the United States was the jury system. That the most direct contact between the people and the government was the jury. And since I became a lawyer, the number of jury trials in the United States has gone down 50%. Less than 1% of all federal cases are decided by juries. That's bad for democracy. And that's sort of one of the other things we want to say about the law and society in our show.
Although I'll just say, and then maybe we can move on, but Goliath, it's a civil case, which is a bit interesting because mostly, I mean, look, people like me think in terms of the judicial system for the most part, especially when it comes to the theater and movies and serial TV shows, as being criminal. I mean, cops in courts. So, this is what are you going after? What are you speaking to with a civil case?
Well, many different things, but I think you're correct, and I think the perception that's now shared by many is that it's an unlevel playing field when it's the state against the criminal defendant. But that playing field is equally as imbalanced in the civil arena now, maybe even more so. In this day, as Jonathan talks about the difference in law firms, these are billion-dollar corporations. They can do discovery in what a fraction of the time that when we were law students and practicing law, it was all going into a room and digging through discovery and doing a lot of the grunt work that young litigators do. Now these big firms will send files overseas, have other people catalog and digitize the data, get it back to them. And it is such a mismatch now between the solo practitioner or even the small firm and the big firms that it's just not fair. I mean, interestingly, we started this project long before the Bernie Sanders movement came to life. But one theme that we have in common is that the system is in part rigged. The judicial system, it's just not a fair fight anymore. Where you maybe have a modicum of a scintilla of a hope of fairness is if you maybe can get in front of the jury. But those chances are so remote because the costs of litigation and the imbalance of resources, as John said, less than 1% in federal court. I'm not sure what it is in state court, but I bet it's not that far off. And that part of the journey that we endeavor to tell in this series is it's a bit like Rocky, our protagonist going uphill, because he knows if he can just finally take his case to the common man, to a jury of his peers, then he might have a shot at justice, may have a chance at truth. But the odds of him getting there, I liken it to that documentary on the little turtles born on the beach. If the eggs somehow hatch, only a fraction of them survive and get to crawl. Once they start crawling, the birds come in and get them. A couple finally make it to the water. The crabs come get them. And maybe one lone turtle out of 1,000 gets to swim and enjoy life. It's almost, the odds are almost the same now with litigation and civil litigation. It is a real uphill climb, and it's part of that climb that is the nucleus of this series. And the other thing that Jonathan touched on, there are costs, not just money costs, but the collateral damage that goes with these cases, whether you're causing expert witnesses to expose themselves and their careers, the clients themselves, but also the lawyer. There's a tremendous toll that can happen on the emotions and psyche of attorneys. I think the depression rate is up to approaching 30% among lawyers, and it's a factor in our community, one that we touch on. I mean, our lead protagonist is a very, very damaged soul, and what inflicted much of that damage upon him is the judicial process.
I'm sure everyone in this room is wondering, I'm certainly wondering, how do you start with an idea that I think we all get in the abstract and turn it into a compelling story with compelling characters? And I know that's a big question, but maybe like, if not Goliath, another project you worked on, what's the spark, what's the moment, what's the sit around the table and talk about it and decide you can do this? Many more years of work.
Well, I think that would probably, that question you'd get a different answer from every writer or show creator.
What about you? You two.
For me, the show has to resonate on some level beyond the entertainment factor. Certainly, we're in the business of entertainment. If you can't make it interesting and provocative and to some extent fun to watch, you're not going to be long for the world in terms of, viewing constituency. But beyond that, assuming you can get that, I look for a show that resonates after final credits, and that's I don't delude myself that we're doing great and important work. We make television shows. We're a means of distracting people from their real worlds. We're not the heroes out curing cancer or the lawyers actually arguing these cases. We make television shows. That being said, you can still try and make a product that moves the viewer. And that's my compass. And most shows don't aspire to that. It's really just entertain, get your audience, and move on. And some of them do it very well, a lot better than I could ever hope to. But for me, if there's not a reason to do it, and that reason usually comes from some emotional center that occasions the audience to be moved, and occasions the audience to have dialogue over the subject matter. I always consider the audience one of the characters in the shows that we've done. I would say there's usually a town crier aspect to much of the work that we've done, but that's us. Everyone has a different idea. If someone came and pitched to me a series about a serial killer, I wouldn't take that pitch. I was hooked on Dexter. I loved it. So different people have different ideas and they can make them work. But you kind of have to listen to your own compass. My compass and Jonathan, I listen to.
Jonathan, though, we talked earlier, and a few days ago, actually, and you said something that I found really interesting, and it has a little to do with when you're talking about you hope people or you expect people would have, you're aiming to create dialogue for people, the viewers. You said the two of you, also are aiming to move things forward. What do you mean by that?
So, Mr. Kelley's from New England, and they're very stoic and modest. I believe he's from Maine, which has got to be the most New England of New England. And so he sits here and he's very modest, and the reality is that, I don't know who played the outfield when Ted Williams was out there, but to work with David Kelley is like being the guy who hits 220 in that lineup, right? You're working with the best and the brightest, and a man who I think has had, by sheer numbers, the tens of millions of people who become jurors and lawyers and judges who have watched his presentation of law, policymakers. It's extraordinary. You take all the law reviews and all the law libraries in this country, and none of them come close to what he's done with just one of those series. So I was a fan. I can't claim to be as big a fan, but I was a fan. And it was an extraordinary blessing in my life to get to work on the practice. 9/11 happened, and we were working on the practice. And when I was at the Justice Department, I had done a rotation in what was then the new terrorism unit. And I worked on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act filings. And I mentioned to David, literally maybe a week after 9/11, you know what's going to happen now is they're going to pass these laws, or they're going to use the FISA court to investigate people that they think could be connected with terrorism. And it's going to be really hard if you're a defense lawyer to get any of the discovery, because it's all going to be classified information. And you can't get classified information unless you have a clearance, and they're not going to give you a clearance, and it's going to be a real mess. And Mr. Kelley said, yeah, we should write that. And in answer to the question, how do you sort of project today's news tomorrow, we wrote a script called Inter armis silent legis, which is, in war, law is silent, an ancient legal maxim. And we wrote an episode about an Arab American who gets caught up in this catch-22, and Rebecca Washington, the lawyer, can't find him because he keeps getting moved. And finally, when he does find him, and this was Mr. Kelley's genius, we realize the government really hasn't been hiding the guy. The guy was afraid to ask for a lawyer. And at some level, he thought his patriotic duty was just to sort of go along with it. And that aired 6 weeks after 9/11. And in the years since, I was kind of amazed, but not really, that that's sort of what happened.
Rendition,
Right,
secret courts.
right. We had, and I won't belabor the issue, but on Boston Legal, Mr. Kelley is in many ways a sick man.
That was my legal training.
Yes. You weren't before, I know. We've always, it's sort of an evergreen story to do a death penalty case. We do it every year, it seems, on the shows, and we may do it next season for Goliath. But it's always bothered Mr. Kelley that you can't have cameras in the Supreme Court. You can never actually see an argument. And so we had the idea that we would pick a case that was current, an actual case that was on the Supreme Court docket, cast actors as the Supreme Court justices, base the arguments on the actual briefs, and run the episode the week before the actual Supreme Court had the argument.
And actors who looked like the justices.
Now, here's the interesting thing. I did not know how many actresses in Hollywood look like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but it was shocking. And at any rate, the episode, the Court Supreme, was a real success, and we took a case out of Louisiana. We did the arguments, and we guessed what the split would be, and we were right. And that was kind of, that was fulfilling.
Yes, and the reward for me there is that episode was successful enough. The relationship between James Spader's character, who was Alan Shore, and the Justice Scalia character, who was the spitting image and well played by the actor, was so much fun that for the actual series finale, we had another case where they appeared before the Supreme Court, this time about a dying patient's right to experimental treatment. And I won't bore you with the details of that case, but it started with an argument, again, between Alan Shore and Justice Scalia, and we had fun with Justice Scalia. It ended with Denny Crane and Alan Shore going to a fishing lodge to get married, which was a separate issue on marital benefits and relationships and whether marriage should be tied to a romantic interest or not. In any event, they were getting married on the dock, and lo and behold, a guest at the lodge was Justice Scalia, who was a hunter and a fisherman. And they asked Justice Scalia to perform the ceremony, to get an upgrade from their state court judge. So the series ended with Justice Scalia presiding over two males getting married. And that was almost the end of the series. Cut to 2 weeks later, I'm in Washington speaking in an affair a little bit like this, and I'm in the green room with the other speaker, and it's Justice Scalia. And we're sitting there, nothing to say, and he finally said, "You did an episode." I said, yes, Justice, I did. I was depicted in it. Yes, you were. Yes, you were. I presided over a gay marriage. They weren't gay, but they were two males. They were fishermen. I said, yes, they both like to fish. He said, all right then. First things first, priorities.
Yeah, he famously did have a sense of humor.
He did.
So we've been told. Well, you're really talking here. You've really gotten into something, an area of that people talk about a lot. How much influence? Well, generally speaking, TV. You talk about TV and its effect on actually making gay marriage acceptable in society. When so many gay characters have appeared in the last few years. But in terms of the law, people talk about the CSI effect. What about that sort of thing?
Well, so
Have you
I'm
thought
sure
of
any of you in criminal justice are familiar with the CSI effect, which is that because of shows like CSI, jurors in criminal cases expect a level of forensic proof that doesn't exist. When I was a prosecutor, this was before CSI, I had a really very low-level, run-of-the-mill DC drug case where the jury should have been out 30 minutes and was out for 2 days. And the note we got back was, one of the jurors would like to see the satellite footage of the drug transaction. Because somebody had some notion that we record everything. On the practice, we did a wonderful series. I've never admitted this to you, so I hope I don't get fired. I think the statute is run. But we were doing an insanity case, and we had an expert witness. And I forget why, but we had lost some dialogue, and we needed to fill some dialogue. And so I had we talked about it, and I said, well, you know, the expert should testify that the defendant was suffering from twin positional trauma, which is a condition where if you've had a brain injury after a previous brain injury, it can have a real effect. And so we did that, and it went well. There's no such thing as twin positional trauma. And years later, I got a call from an attorney who had a case and had tracked me down and said, what was the citation for that? Because he wanted to use it. So that, you know, we always try to be accurate for a dramatic purpose. The reason we try to be accurate is for the same reason they're accurate on a medical show. I used to watch ER, and they'd be screaming medical terms to one another, and I have no idea what they're talking about, but I believed it was true. And I think the same is true in a law show. If you go too far off the path, I don't think it works as well.
What about nonfiction? We've been seeing this sort of stunning, in the last couple of years, these sort of stunning long-form stories, episodic stories of what are real-life cases through the lens of the storyteller. The sense is that whatever we're hearing is real. So, you know, what about these shows that are nonfiction? I'm just curious what you make of them.
Well, I loved the Making of a Murder. In fact, I saw was it Making of a Murderer?
So it's just Making of a Murderer.
Making of a Murderer. I saw that and I go, I'm done. You know, truth is often stranger than fiction, but sometimes it's more entertaining and riveting too. And I thought, that's it. I can't do what they accomplished because I just thought it was fascinating. It was a great insight into the machinations of the criminal law system. It was a wonderful pathology of characters. I mean, between the defendant and his mother, and I just was rapt watching that show and daunted. Then, of course, some of the articles that have come out after, maybe they're doing the same thing I did, making some stuff up and shading the truth.
There's been those accusations, and then you have to, how you
know
wade through them, there's no way, obviously, the viewer.
But it was great filmmaking. Similarly, what's it called, The Making of O.J.? That was the documentary. People versus O.J. was the series, and then the documentary.
ESPN series, yeah.
I thought both of those were spectacular as well. I mean, when you real life can sometimes be very, very gripping, and those were well done productions. So, you know, daunted is the word I use because it's tough to duplicate that.
I think we were so taken with those shows that's one of the main reasons we saw this huge open territory for civil cases, because, you know. The criminal cases are obviously very interesting and very immediate. The thing that affects all Americans is the rise of corporate power and the enormous advantage that the wealthy have when it comes to money, property, and life. Without giving away too much, the case involved in Goliath very much has to do with what happens to law in a free society during a time of perpetual war. It's a civil case, but it's a civil case that involves American policies, both at home and abroad. And we didn't really see any shows talking about that. The other thing is, David says those shows are great filmmaking, and I agree. They're storytelling, they're narrative, and they have editing. And, I wonder about those shows. I love them. I watch them all. But to the degree they're being presented as the ipsissima verba truth of what happened, that makes me nervous. Because in any show, someone's made an editorial decision to leave some things in and to leave some things out.
Talking about OJ, I covered the OJ trial. One of the things, and I'm sorry I can't recall the statistics exactly, but it's pretty close to this, which was that when the subject of him being framed, which was the entire, if you get right down to it, legal basis for not finding him guilty because he didn't do it because he was framed. What happened was with white Americans, they polled, and they broke it down racially, and black Americans approximately in the reverse thought that he could have been framed to white Americans. In other words, like 70% of black Americans, African Americans would say, yeah, I could go with that. They didn't know, but that's what they thought was possible. 70, 80% of white Americans like, are you kidding me? Who would ever frame somebody? That sort of thing. So much has happened since then with videos and whatnot, and on television, and in your book, Deadly Force, where you have a policeman going on trial, being prosecuted for killing a man. And that's a big part of the issue. How have you seen how America looks at, all of America now, looks at what's possible, nefarious and otherwise, within the criminal justice system, different from, say, 1994, when OJ was put on trial?
To me, it feels that the distrust is exponentially compounded. It was profound during the OJ trial, and it seems like that divide has only grown.
But also, aren't we hearing, isn't there an acceptance or understanding now of all the possible bad things that could happen on, all sides? I think people didn't know the justice system very well at the time, and you had your small and very narrow, within your community, ideas of what you knew happened to people around you. And obviously, people in the black community knew about being framed. You didn't have to be framed to have known somebody, heard of somebody, had a relative, something like that. White people in those days didn't give it any credibility.
No.
For the most part. So, look, your book is, may I say, you might want to talk about that.
I'd love to talk about my book, now available on audio.
It's right over there.
If you can't get it on audio, I will sit in the back of your car and read it to you as you drive around. When I was a prosecutor, I handled police brutality, civil rights cases, and the book Deadly Force, which is the first in a trilogy of books about a federal prosecutor in my old office in LA. The case in Deadly Force involves a police officer shooting and killing a man who turns out to not have been armed. And it's based on a case that I prosecuted. I also worked on the Rodney King federal prosecution. It's interesting. When I started as a prosecutor, it was in D.C. Superior Court, right after Marion Barry had been caught on video smoking crack. The first time. Thank you very much for those of you keeping score. You're very good. The U.S. Attorney's Office was across the street from the Superior Court. To get to the office, you had to walk past a big crowd of people, and the big crowd of people included Flower of Islam, gentlemen in bow ties and suits, handing out leaflets saying, whatever the evidence is in any criminal case, acquit. Because the U.S. Attorney is an occupying force in our community, Jay Stevens is a war criminal, and do not convict any man that you are judging. The U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. which normally would run a conviction rate at trial of about 95%, was running a conviction rate of 50%. There was jury nullification happening every single day. So the racial divide is as old as our country, and those jurors understood that people got framed long before O.J. In Deadly Force, I wrote the book because I was watching the news of Ferguson with my kids, and they asked me, "You used to do these cases, why isn't the Justice Department stepping in and prosecuting those officers?" And I saw the talking heads on cable news saying, "Why doesn't the Justice Department prosecute those cases?" And so I wanted to sort of peel the curtain back and show what those cases actually cost. What they cost the community, what they cost the prosecutor, what they cost the witnesses. Because I want us to have a conversation beyond where we are now. Because of all the civil rights cases I prosecuted against bad police, most of the victims were not black. In California, twice as many Latinos are killed by the police in shootings than black people. 2 of the victims in my case were white. What did they all have in common? They were poor. They lived in poor communities with lousy police departments. In the case that inspired Deadly Force, the police department had 2 sheriff's deputies who were in the practice of beating confessions out of suspects. The only reason we caught them is because these 2 guys forgot that they beat one of the suspects in a room that was wired, and they recorded the actual beating. In that case, after we convicted them, the judge apologized to the police officers for having to sentence them, saluted their service, and chided us for bringing a case where there had been no dead body. So, I think the Black Lives Matter movement is incredibly important, and I think it's done a lot of good, but I think we got to talk about the bigger issue, which is you're going to be a victim of police brutality. You're much more likely to be if you're poor and if you live in a community that has lousy policing. And until we get a national, I'm not running for office, but until we get a national standard for what constitutes excessive force, and until we actually require that every police shooting gets a federal review, I don't think we're going to ever see a change. And since the book has come out, there have been 4 major police shooting cases, and the Freddie Gray defendants were all cleared. In none of those cases, from Ferguson on, did a police officer who was in a position to see what happened come forward to testify. To me, those are the issues that we're not talking about that we should be talking about.
You think we're not talking about it, though? I mean,
Well, I just
actually
talked
think
about
now,
it, so
yes.
now I can't say it now.
I think we are talking about it.
Right.
I think the question is, things are so complicated. I mean, Freddie Gray, when you start breaking it down and you start breaking any of these cases down, that's what's sort of interesting about what the 2 of you do. You start seeing why this may go this way, why that may go that way, and not just something like jury nullification. I mean, I know with Marion Barry, it was a sting. And nobody likes stings, and especially not Washington jurors. And you could see it. It was his girlfriend, or it was, I guess, who was watching that as carefully as I was supposedly watching, because I was in Washington too. What was it, 89? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was sort of set up. Here, have some crack, by a pretty woman. And I still remember he said, "My nose is open," which means a couple of different things, not just about cocaine. It means sex too. So, it's like some people some people were saying, well, he wasn't talking to her about that. He was talking to her about something else. So I just think it's the most fascinating thing that you're doing what you're doing, and that people this seems to be like a major part of what people see now. On television, as we know now, in podcasts, has to do with the criminal justice system, the justice system, civil justice. Why do you think that is?
I know that in Herndon's book about Lincoln, he talks about what a great storyteller Lincoln was. And he posits that the reason why Lincoln loved law was because you couldn't get a better place to get stories.
Yeah.
That Lincoln was not simply a great storyteller, but like all great storytellers, he loved stories. And Herndon's got a great quote about if you want to know about murder, disillusion, love, sex, death, you can't come up with a better place to find it than in a law office. So I think this is the American character. I think Americans from the beginning of our culture have loved law because it is where every story can be told. I've always felt that Joseph Conrad wrote about the sea. I'm not going to sea, but I can certainly write every human story possible through a law story. The other thing that you talk about, sort of getting back to the original idea, I once prosecuted a nuclear physicist for passing secrets to the People's Republic of China. And my reward for that was being asked to testify in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and you really haven't lived until you've been questioned by Strom Thurmond. The most interesting part of that was, at this point in his benighted life, he had shrunk to a place where you couldn't actually see him, you just saw the top of his head. And, but I got called by 6 separate nuclear physicists accusing me of targeting nuclear physicists, as if somehow we had a sort of a bias that we were pursuing nuclear physicists. And it occurred to me that no one likes to have their group targeted or picked on. And people of color have had that experience for as long as this country has existed. Why wouldn't they be suspicious? Part of why we are writing these shows is there is a wish fulfillment that law can evolve and adapt and be better. And I believe that that's the only hope for this country, because I'm not sure it's going to happen through the electoral process. I could be wrong. But
You may or may not remember this, but you once said that Ally McBeal to you was like a novel. That is to say, you saw yourself taking that character and working, and she was going to evolve and change somewhat and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But that was episodic TV, so things began and ended, and then the next week they picked up, and there were other, cross stories going on. Is there something different about that than than streaming? Stories that you can expect, series rather, that you could expect many people to watch all night long or over a weekend. Is there something different about how the two of you think now than in previous shows that you've worked on together?
Well,
is it more like a novel?
I don't know if it's more like a novel. It's definitely a different art. And it's a mixed bag. As I said earlier, one of the characters I've always felt that's inside our shows, our series, is the audience. And dissecting a show, talking about a show, people arguing over the values represented in that show, that's always been part of our wish list, that we really want to open up that can of worms on the sofa in the various living rooms across the country. Television watching is a little less communal now. People watch it on their devices. They're alone in their rooms. They also, as you say, binge watch. And there are pluses in that you get to see an entire series in a very short window, and you can tell stories and not have to reprise parts of that story as you go along, which is inefficient storytelling. I think in traditional network or broadcast television, you're considered a habitual viewer if you watch 30 to 40% of the episodes. So it's incumbent upon the producers to bring the audience up to speed, to assume that maybe they didn't see the last episode or the one before that. So you're telling a story, but you're also trying to include the people that missed an episode. And that's inefficient storytelling to a certain extent. In binge watching, the assumption is that everyone's watching every minute. You don't have to take those beats to bring people up to speed, and that I love about it. What I didn't enjoy about the process is you're selling an addiction of sorts, and you're ending episodes so they have to watch the next one. It's like giving someone some popcorn, and you want them to eat, and they'll just keep eating and keep eating and keep eating. It's a different animal from. I always enjoyed the episode ended, and now let people think about it, talk about it, and absorb it, process it, and then start the next one a week later. Now that's just not happening. And you also can get away with a lot more in the binge watching television shows because the audience doesn't have time to process so much what just happened. It's what's going to happen next. They'll forget about it. You can have a U.S. congressman or senator push a woman in front of the train, beat a man over the head and leave him in his car, and not have police ever come to ask questions about it because you've moved on to something else. I believe that if there were time between some of those episodes where people had a chance to go, I was thinking about that, they wouldn't withstand some of that scrutiny. So it is very different. We get pushed and prodded by Amazon all the time as we've been making this show. What's the hook? What's the twist? What's going to make people come back? And they're constantly listing toward that. They're called WTF moments. I think Scandal started it, whereas there were kind of the Twitter universe where people were texting WTF ? Like, wow, can you believe that just happened? And by the time two people got to say, well, that could never happen, there was another WTF moment over there. And you're watching over there, and then they're watching over there, and then the popcorn's gone, and then it's over. I'm sort of the old fart dinosaur that goes, could that really happen? And certainly I've taken a lot of leaps and licenses of things that really probably would not happen in the real world. But in binge watching, there are some limitations, but there are also some storytelling opportunities. And truth be told, I'm still figuring them out because it's the first one that I've ever done.
Good answer.
Yeah, Shondaram's genius at the.
She
I have to
is.
say, I've stayed up all night watching 5 of them because I couldn't bear to not keep going on. But it's also would work on a weekly situation where you're just waiting all week to tune in.
My daughter's now 23, but as a teenager, I'd be sitting downstairs, and I'd hear her scream up from her bedroom, and I thought, do I have to go save her, or am I going? No, it's Thursday. Oh, okay. So she was addicted like many others, and they do it very, very well.
Huh. Well, Raymond Chandler had whole novels that didn't make any sense, although you kept reading. So, I mean, when you come right down to it, breaking it down and making sure that everything hooked up to the next thing. But for you, Jonathan, and then I will turn it over to the audience, few similar thoughts on this? Or?
Well, I just listening to David, it occurs to me for this audience, you should be aware of the fact that the viewing public, forget the CSI effect now. It occurred to me as David was talking, there's the WTF effect. If I was trying cases now, I would be very concerned about how to structure the narrative of my case to keep that audience of jurors engaged. Because the more storytellers like us in popular culture elevate the WTF, I think it has an impact on how jurors and witnesses and clients form their expectations of justice. I think it changes the perception of justice. I actually think it changes the perception of what a political campaign should be. So if I were still in the trenches and anybody would actually give me any money to try a case, and I don't know why they would, I'd be thinking in terms of attention spans and entertainment expectations.
And news as well.
And news as well.
I once endeavored to do a show about the news years ago, and I was lucky enough to sort of follow the producers around at a morning news show. And I was stunned at how their job and my job were so similar. You had people around pitching stories, and either they thought they would fly with the viewer or they would not be entertaining. But it wasn't so much news-driven as it was entertainment-oriented. And you're right, in politics, we've seen someone rise to the fore with an interesting narrative that probably was thought to be impossible a few years ago. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the two, streaming and broadcast, I think back to Boston Legal, we would end every episode with two men on a balcony talking. And that scene would go 2 or 3 minutes, just talking, and usually reflecting on what had happened in that hour, and then further reflecting on how they viewed it through their particular prism. You'd have to mow down dead bodies at Amazon before they would ever let us end an episode with two people just talking. Denny Crane or Alan Shore would have been over the balcony and dead by episode 2. Well, then I've got no character for episode 3. We'll bring someone else in. That balcony is always there. And then the next episode, they're going to think, who's next? And
I think you've done a wonderful job on this stage today.
Thank you.
And I could listen for the whole afternoon.